You're all alone out there. You have no team. Once you're on the court, you got to figure it out. That was probably one of the challenging mentally things I had to conquer on a daily basis. It's so hard to step out and go, I'm actually a really good tennis player. You don't want to show your vulnerability there because that can be used against you, right? I needed to match my level with international players if I ever was going to fulfill a dream of being a professional. It was an amazing but tough and intense and definitely different upbringing to your average New Zealander. I would be way too nervous that I wouldn't be able to perform. Sometimes I wouldn't be able to even remember what happened in the match. It's terrifying if I think about it.
My name is Kaila Colbin. You're listening to my interview with Marina Erakovic, and this is the Hunger and Heart Podcast. Enjoy the show. Hello, my name is Kaila Colbin, and welcome to Hunger and Heart, a podcast on the intersection of wild ambition and fierce compassion. My guest today is Marina Erakovic. Marina spent a decade inside the world's top 100 tennis players. She competed in 36 Grand Slams, reached a career-high ranking of 39th in the world. She won 9 WTA titles and 18 ITF titles. She represented New Zealand at 2 Olympic Games and 1 Commonwealth Games, and played over 600 main draw singles matches, including 44 Grand Slams. In this conversation, we talk about what it's really like trying to make it in a massive global sport with almost no support or infrastructure at home. We talk about her family's immigration story, the sacrifices that made her career possible, and the pressure that came along with those sacrifices. And we explore why tennis, how it suited the way her brain works, why it lit her up, and how she learned to grow not just as an athlete, but as a person. So here you are. My conversation with Marina Erakovic. So basically, I spend quite a lot of time training and facilitating people on these like courage programs, courage, empathy, vulnerability, shame, all that kind of stuff. And what will inevitably happen is we'll get about halfway through day 2 of like a courage program, and somebody will say something like, look, I mean, you can empathize all you want, but at some point, you have to get the job done, right? And my answer is always like, you can empathize and you can get the job done, that these are not separate ends of, opposing ends of a continuum, that these are 2 separate variables that you can have both of or one of or neither of. And so I kind of eventually got fucked off enough about this that I decided to start a podcast to talk about this, like, how can we reconcile massive ambition with being at peace with who we see when we look in the mirror? So that's the general premise of the pod. That's the kind of stuff that we talk about. And so I pretty much talk to people who have achieved in sport to tackle this question, but that's kind of where we're at and what we're talking about.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I'd be interested to understand, even outside of sport, what would be some of the examples where you, even in your workshops, where people have called that out in their lives, you know?
Yeah. So a huge example. I mean, the typical when I'm training people, the typical example that comes up is people not knowing how to hold people to account, to set standards and create and maintain boundaries. So like, for example, something that'll happen is somebody will say to me something like, this person has been showing up late. They're late all the time, but now I empathize, so it's okay. Right. And I will respond to that and go, you can empathize and still make clear that showing up on time is a requirement of the role, and still make clear that the consequences of continuing to not show up on time will be first a warning, then a second warning, then a performance management, then that these 2 things can go hand in hand. But one of the things that happens, like I created a little 2x2 for it because people do consider this as like performance over here and care over here on a single line. And I created a little 2x2 that was standards and care. And what happens is when you have low standards and low care, you get apathy. When you have high care and low standards, you get coddling or enablement. And this is the thing people are often worried about in my work. Like people will just get away with anything if we just do all this empathy nonsense.
Uh,
If you have my hypothesis, but I'd like to test it with you. If you have high standards and low care, you get burnout.
uh,
And if you have high standards and high care, that's where we get sustainable high performance. But I'd like to test that with you. What's your take on that?
It's a really interesting question. I tend to agree with you that yes, you can definitely have both. Um, Thinking of my sporting days, I think probably most athletes would say it's a very selfish thing, right? For sure. Especially at the beginning of your career, especially when you're young, you don't even have the skills yet to think about what other people think or how they're feeling. And it's just, I think it's also probably a generational thing coming from parents who are baby boomers potentially, where it's that attitude of, I've never heard my parents go to me, "Oh, when something's happened, that's really tough, Marina. Let's just sit with that for a second," you know? Like, it's always been, "I'll be fine, just get on with it," type of thing, right? So, that probably stems from that too, but I think as you mature, probably thinking of sport, as you mature as an athlete, as you grow, I think you have to develop those skills where you actually step into someone else's shoes or you think about things differently from another perspective. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to develop and grow your game and things like that because you have to, it's not, you can't just stay in your bubble, you have to go outside the bubble to actually grow and develop.
I love this. Okay, right off the bat, like I have 50 questions that are all kind of jostling for attention and want to all pour out of my mouth at the same time. So the first thing I will say is that what you just said is highly consistent with what I've heard from other guests, which is as an athlete, you have to be selfish. Like if you're going to perform, you have to prioritize that performance over pretty much anything else. And that's your job, right? As a coach, your job is to create the conditions for your athlete to thrive, to perform at their absolute best. So what you just said is not inconsistent with in any way from the messaging that I've been hearing, which is if I'm trying to perform, I have to be like, what's the nutrition I need? What's the sleep I need? What's the emotional protection I need? So people aren't bothering me. So I'm not reading the comments or the, whatever. Um, totally consistent there. Here's something I'm super curious about. So I heard you just say that, your parents were never like, let's just sit with it for a minute. I did a bunch of research on you prior to this conversation. And one of the things I heard you talk about was that in New Zealand, certainly when you were coming up, there was this kind of like, she'll be right attitude, like just harden up, keep going, etc. I also heard you talk about, and this, I think, from your time on the board of New Zealand tennis, that there can be a misconception in New Zealand of if we perform well in New Zealand, that'll be enough to like let us perform on the world stage. And the way that translated for me, which might be inaccurate, so I'd love for you to correct me if it is. The way that translated for me was our ambition is kind of a little bit parochial or a little bit like isolated. We don't actually understand what it means to have global ambition. How do you reconcile these two things of like, you have to work harder and just like stop, crying, et cetera, or with the like lack of awareness we have about what it looks like to really perform at a global level?
Yeah, good question. I think both things help us and they don't help us. Let's start with the positives. So the she'll be right attitude or just get on with it is amazing in terms of you let things just roll off your back, you don't ruminate, you kind of keep going, it helps your drive. Um, but I think the negatives there are also to take stock of what's going on around you, to be a little bit more aware, instead of just pushing if it's, especially if it's not the right choice or if it's not right for you. Um, and the second one is there's a lot of factors that influence why it's so important to have a global mindset with tennis, especially coming from New Zealand. Um, so we are a very small country. We are far away from the tennis world. It's very expensive to play tennis professionally. It's very hard to fly from New Zealand. We're far away. It's, tickets cost a lot of money. You need support. You need someone to go with you. It's not a very well-backed sport in this country. There's no funding. So, there's a lot of factors that influence why it's hard and why it's important to have that global mindset. We don't have the talent pool. We don't have that many players like Europe, like the States, etc. So this mindset helped me because I needed to match my level with international players, with players from Europe and players from the States, if I ever was going to fulfill a dream of being a professional, and playing Grand Slams and making it to being a top 100 tennis player. Because there's just not those opportunities and not that skill level and not that exposure in New Zealand. So from that angle, it's more of just a practical, it's a practical lens. And as a kid, I didn't really understand that, and I was lucky enough to have a coach early on. It was Chris Lewis, who was a former Wimbledon finalist, and who kind of drilled that into me and went, okay, yes, you just won all these nationals in New Zealand, but actually, what matters is how you go in Australia. What matters is how you do in Florida, how you go in Paris, those sorts of things. And so I think I even shot myself in the foot a little bit having so much success in New Zealand and winning so many things early on, because it probably grew a sense of, it's that growth mindset, right? It grew a sense of, oh, I have to protect what I have and I have to be good enough, instead of going, I want to develop and grow and learn from a loss, or if I didn't do so well. So sorry, probably went off a tangent there, but
So good. It's so good. I have so many questions. Tell me about Chris Lewis. What did he do that made him a good coach?
I think the real pros around Chris at that time, I was very young. I was probably 8 or 9 years old when I joined the squads that Chris and his brother Mark were leading. And I think a few things. He recognized that I had talent early on, and obviously he was exposed to a lot of that, in his career. He was someone that did it, that actually made it and was, amazing players. So someone I really respected and wow, aspired to. So every time I stepped on the court with him, I had super motivation to do the best that I could, right? He was very big work ethic, big work ethic. So understood, um, you got to show up early, you got to do your thing, you got to train. So those sorts of things. And probably a little bit of technically for tennis and the way I played, I developed my volleys and backhand slice probably a bit thanks to him, because, that was the game at the time and he had a very good backhand slice, backhand volley. So probably, influenced me there. So yeah, those sorts of things.
All of that, like, I'm going to make an assumption here, but again, please correct me. The work ethic, the showing up early, the, work rate, the training, etc. The assumption I'm making is that you were well up for that. And he basically was like, here's the standard and the challenge. And you're like, all right, let's go. Is that a fair assumption? I see you smiling at it.
Yes, yes. I mean, yeah, I came from, you know, we migrated to New Zealand due to difficult circumstances, former war in Yugoslavia. Came to New Zealand, my parents were just a suitcase. I was 6 years old, my sister was 9. So there was already on the onset a kind of drive and a determination to succeed or to make it. Which, probably they should do this study, but it would be interesting to see how many athletes come from a certain background and kind of make it, right? Um, but yeah, I think I was probably prepped, and it was kind of uh, a collision of good timing of some sort. Um, eh, I mean, there's also not, you know, looking back on things, in hindsight, that was also that old mentality of that era where Chris was from, which was like the 1970s, 1980s, which was a very tough, very, you train 10 hours a day, which in hindsight probably wasn't the best kind of a course for a 10-year-old, 11-year-old girl. You had to kind of think about, and I got injured a lot, and I didn't get the skill yet to develop how to, prioritize training and timing and recovery and those sorts of things. So there's pros and cons of everything, but as you say, yeah, it was a good timing that it happened all.
We're going to come back to the story of you coming over from Yugoslavia because I'm curious about that. But I want to pick up on this, the 10 hours a day maybe wasn't the best thing for a growing girl, injured a lot, et cetera. What would you say to people who respond to that and say, yeah, but you kind of made it? Like, that isn't that what got you to be 39th in the world and, 25th in doubles?
It's a fine line. It's a fine line. Yeah, it's a good question. It's kind of like saying, well, if you didn't have that mindset and you didn't work that hard, would you have made it? True. On the other side of the coin, maybe if I time boxed certain things and had more recovery and did certain things, maybe I would have had less injuries and had a better career. Who knows? You don't know the answer to that question. I think you have to have both, but and now I think we are, especially in tennis, there's so much more knowledge around how to train good, what recovery looks like, what to eat, what to wear, how to calendar, how to prioritize your year, which tournaments to play, what suits you. It's all a real science now. Um, but yes, it's a bit of both, and now I don't have that laser focus and work. I mean, I probably do. I probably still have it, but I look back on myself as that, 11, 12-year-old, and I go, well, where on earth did that come from?
Well, I mean, which brings us back to the, excuse me, which brings us back to the immigration story. You glossed over it. It's a reasonably robust story. Can you tell me what do you remember about that time? What was it like coming over? Do you have any recollection of it?
Yeah, I mean, bits and pieces. I remember we arrived on my birthday into New Zealand, and
When's your birthday?
sorry, it was
When's
March
your
the
birth?
6th. March the 6th. Yeah. So I didn't, me and my sister didn't speak English. I don't really remember learning English. It just kind of started to speak within a 6-month period. I remember starting school and yeah, just kind of so I was always a quiet, shy kid anyway, so I was just a bit probably shell shocked. Um, there's just bits and pieces of those memories, and I remember, our first place we stayed, and I remember we didn't have a lot of things. I remember the first toy that I got maybe like a year later, which was a little blue skateboard, and the scarcity, and we didn't have much, right? And it was my parents' hard work, and it's kind of like at my age now, moving to a whole new other country with 2 little kids, not speaking the language. It's terrifying if I think about it. So, yeah, it was a big change, but I think also my parents were a lot happier here, and in terms of the life and the safety, and there was an ease and a weight off their back, which probably, helped us as well.
Did you escape Yugoslavia or were you able
No,
to?
we were able to leave, yeah,
Mhm.
we went from Split, so there wasn't much conflict in Split, but, um, it was my parents didn't want us to grow up in that environment where we just wouldn't have had the same opportunities if we stayed there, and in terms of at the time, it's always something to do with race and ethnicity and who you are and where you're from, and they didn't want to have to deal with that, especially for their kids, and, my dad was a ship's captain, so he was lucky he actually worked overseas during the war, um, so he managed to get, like, a job, uh, originally in South Africa, so we were gonna move to South Africa, and then that fell through last minute, and then we had friends who came to New Zealand before us and said, "Look, this is really good here. You should come." And so they just took the risk and yeah, just came, and best decision, really.
What kind of ships was I love that your dad was a ship's captain. And just like that term ship's captain, I have such a mental picture of it and I feel really warmly towards it, even though I know nothing about your dad and I know nothing about what actually, like, I have a caricature, you know?
Yeah.
What kind of ships did your dad captain?
So my dad was on oil tankers. While we lived in Yugoslavia, he was traveling around the world. So it was, he was going all over ports across the world, probably crude oil, and shipping it to refineries and things like that. And then when we arrived to New Zealand, he did that, but only within New Zealand. So Marsden Point at the time was the big refinery, so he'd basically go along the coast and ports of New Zealand and crude oil. So the big tankers that you don't want anything to go wrong with.
Right. So huge job, like a huge amount of
job.
responsibility.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I understand that your parents kind of went all in on your tennis journey, but I also, okay, so I want to hear about how your tennis journey began and how you went from, oh, this is kind of fun to, oh no, this is real. Tell me about that.
So we started playing. My dad played recreationally at the local club in Split, and I was about 5 years old, and my sister was older. She was 7 or 8. So we would kind of hang out at the club while dad played. My sister, she was old enough to join the squads there, so she started playing, and I just, had time on my hands. I was waiting around, and I just picked up a ball and a racket and hit against the wall. So that's how I kind of started. And then when we arrived to New Zealand, it was kind of something we did. We went to the tennis club, the local tennis club, and we played. Um, and it's just something that I guess my dad saw an early talent for both of us, particularly me, probably. And we went to local tournaments when I was, 7 or 8. At that time, I kind of auditioned for those Auckland squads with Chris and Mark. And I was starting to do well straight off the bat. Was making finals of, under 12s and under 10s or whatever it was at the time. And it wasn't until I started playing junior ITFs, so those are actual world ranking juniors, where we probably went, she's actually doing well on the world stage. So at the age of 17, 18, I was the 5th junior in the world. Won a couple of junior Grand Slams in doubles. I was playing with players who were starting to turn professional. So I think it probably was the transition from about 15, 16, 17, where we were like, probably going to go for this. And I figured, look, I see these players who are my year who are doing well on the pro circuit. I might try this myself. If it doesn't work out, I can go to university. And I gloss over this quite heavily, but it was a very intense journey. I mean, as you say, my parents invested a lot. There wasn't that much funding there. My dad, he works 6 weeks on, 6 weeks off, or 6 to 8 weeks. And so when he wasn't on board, he would travel with me to tournaments. That means my sister basically didn't see her dad for 4 or 5 years. My mom, every weekend, everything came out of pocket, right? They invested everything. So it was a huge sacrifice, huge team, family effort, all round. And it wasn't until kind of I started playing those pro tournaments at about 18, 19, where it was hard. It was really hard to break through, to actually make a living off tennis. It is still today. It gets better and better each year, but it still is. And it wasn't until I was kind of that 19, 20, I was maybe ranked 200-300, that a foundation in New Zealand was set up called the Seed Foundation, which was basically just local New Zealanders who love tennis pulled in a bunch of money to help me break through. And once I kind of cracked the top 100, I was able to self-fund or fund myself. But yeah, it was an amazing but tough and intense and definitely different upbringing to your average New Zealander.
Did you navigate that with your family? Like, did it cause friction with your sister, for example, that her dad's not around, or was there friction between your parents ever because of it?
No, not overall. I mean, obviously there's moments where it's tough, or obviously I don't think so. I think my sister was incredibly supportive. She kind of decided it wasn't for her, the tennis. She was kind of under 16 national champ at the time, but she was more interested to go to university, to hang out with her friends, that sort of stuff. And she was pretty independent from a very young age, and did very well in her own, business career, and is still doing well. But yeah, I think overall,
You all just
it,
decided, like,
we all
this
just
is,
decided, I mean, they recognized that there was a talent. I was doing well. It was kind of like a pride, or a special joy for everyone to see me go out and succeed on that world stage.
you mentioned before about immigrants, and, whether people who move country or come from a challenging background like that, whether there's a consistency in terms of overperforming as athletes. But I don't know about athletes, but certainly in entrepreneurship, immigrants tend to over-index because this thing of like, actually, I if I am a migrant because of challenging circumstances, I am someone who is going to take agency over what's going to happen next in my life. And so that,
Mhm.
certainly they tend to over-index in terms of entrepreneurship.
Yeah, interesting.
I'm curious. I want to stick with this, with the sacrifices your family made. And I've heard you talk about the pressure of those sacrifices, this thing of like, my parents are giving everything, my father's giving everything. And when you lose that, the pressure of that, how did you navigate that pressure? In addition to the pressure of just trying to play and trying to win against the world's best, how'd you navigate that pressure with your family?
I wasn't navigating with my family. It was probably navigating it within myself. And it was years of hard work. And I don't think I ever really conquered that challenge. I think it was something that I had to deal with throughout my entire career. It got better as I went along, but I I always was, I'd get panic attacks, or I would be way too nervous, that I wouldn't be able to perform, or sometimes I wouldn't be able to even remember what happened in the match. I would just all be a blank, There were, and it got better as I learned skills on how to, deal with it. And it wasn't just that, but I think tennis it's a tricky sport because you are, at the end of the day, especially if you're playing singles, you're all alone out there and you have no team. You have your coach or whatever, but once you're on the court, you're on the court. You got to figure it out. So it, it was probably something that I wish, in hindsight, looking back, that I maybe even took a break. Someone like Ash Barty took a year off or even longer because it was tough times for her and she needed an out. And thinking back, I wish I did the same because I feel it would have given me a perspective of, hey, I miss tennis, or I really want to do it now for a different reason, or um, so that was probably one of the most challenging mentally things I had to deal with and had to kind of conquer on a daily basis. But
What are some of the techniques?
I think, well, there's a lot. I think initially when I first realized that your thoughts aren't real, that was a big game changer. That actually what you're thinking doesn't mean that's true. Um, I think mindfulness, meditation, trying to be in the present moment, the power of positive thoughts, you call it the law of attraction, or whatever. Um, Having things outside of tennis, that tennis doesn't define you. It's not, if you win or lose, it doesn't mean that's you. Marina, the person, now has lost, and the thing. So it's big combination of things that kind of, as I went through that journey, I learned along the way through, I guess, reading a lot, through sessions with different psychologists, and trying to figure out how to help myself and how to get better, and how to, because that equals better performance on the court too.
Oh, this is so interesting because it comes back to what we were talking about earlier, right? This thing of like, how do we, if we have this massive ambition, what kind of care supports the ambition and what kind of care equals moving away from the ambition? And we've had this huge shift over the years towards an appreciation of, for example, recovery or nutrition. And there's a similar thing there in terms of mental skills, this huge shift towards taking care of my mindset supports me to do more. But it doesn't mean that I can't achieve at a super high level with aggression and without taking care of myself and with training 10 hours a day and with doing all those things. To me, the question is, how can we achieve in a way that becomes a joyful expression of who we are, as opposed to in a way that I am doing it because I'm forced to, or I'm suffering, or I'm miserable, or I'm doing it because I've got something to prove. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does. I think that's the key. You want to get there, and I think there were moments where I definitely had that too. I enjoy the game of tennis. I like the strategy. I like the skill involved. Um, I I love figuring out new places and traveling the world. Um, but I think I can only speak for myself. I think that whole journey for me still made it super hard to always get that. I sometimes got the Marina who really struggled with the pressure and the nerves and couldn't, overcome it. Um, so I think it's a good question. I wonder if it's around the kind of development of a young player, about understanding that, there's other things in life and that it's still possible, but growing as a person as well as the athlete, I think.
Yeah, I've heard that described as role versus identity.
Yeah.
That I play tennis. I am a whole human being who doesn't have to win, on the world stage in order to be like a worthy individual.
I agree. I agree. I think, yeah, and I think you can see that in some players today. Looking back, I don't think I smiled that often when I was on the court, and you see the players that kind of have got it, if sort of under quotation marks, but you see that there's a ease in their face, or they're present, or there's sometimes a smile, and that's where you kind of want to be.
Yeah. I read this thing recently that really caught my attention. It was from I think she was a tech entrepreneur. But it was about the concept of wounded striving, and this distinction between, are we striving because we're trying to heal some kind of a hole in ourselves, in our souls, some kind of a wound that, I will only be good enough when I get the gold medal or when I get the World Cup or whatever. Or are we striving because, like I said earlier, it's a joyful expression of who we are and who we want to be. And what I just heard you talk about, those players who've quote unquote got it, is that joyful expression of who they are and who they want to be.
Yeah, I think you bring up an interesting topic there too. I think it's hard to have that sense of the overall view of what you're doing. I think that comes after you retire, and I found that when you're in it, it's so hard to step out and go, "Oh, wow, I'm actually a really good tennis player. Oh, and I've done some pretty good things." You're in this run, it's always, "Well, I've won this tournament. Well, now I need to win this one. And now I've got this ranking, and now I've got to get this ranking." And, or I've got 20 kgs now, and the reps I've done, I need to get to 25. It's a constant, and I get it. It should be that way, because you're constantly trying to get better and better and better, and fine. But I think those moments where you can actually stop and appreciate what you're doing, And if I looked back and wanted to give myself advice, and maybe that's why I think the year off would have been great for me, is just to get some perspective. And I think you'll hear most athletes say when I retired, I looked back, I could actually properly look back and appreciate what I'd done.
I'm going to ask you a question that might sound weird. I am imagining it's unlikely you'll have an answer for, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So already in this conversation, you've talked about tennis, that it's not very well supported. It's not funded in New Zealand. I have heard you separately talk about tennis as it's not particularly interesting to kids because it's a solo sport. You're not having fun with your mates, etc. So you might not have an answer to this because it might have just been like, well, I don't know. That's just what I did. But have you thought much about like why you'd like, I'm like this, she sounds like she's really not selling it.
Yeah, it's true, probably. I really enjoyed it because I was probably still am. I'm a shy, introverted person, and I like to do things that are skill involved. For example, I like playing table tennis, or I like playing pool, or I like things that require some kind of skill and thinking about it. I'm not. I don't, funnily enough, I don't enjoy running. I don't enjoy endurance sports or anything like that. I'd really struggle to go to the gym these days. I kind of have a little workout at home. So I liked the, you know, the figuring it out and getting better at something. And I had a very early inclination to good hand-eye coordination. So anything with a ball. I loved playing football. I loved, and tennis was just that for me. It was a perfect fit. So, and there is a real, I mean, there is a huge amount of, I don't know how to describe it, when you've gone out there, you're on your own, and I know that can be negative when you're on your own, but also when you're on your own and you figure it out and you win, it's an incredible feeling. Like, it's the high on highs, in front of thousands of people as well. It's the biggest, I don't think I'll ever have some of those highs that I've had, right? Um, but like you say, in terms of engaging kids, yes and no. Yes, we don't have it here as popular as elsewhere, but in other places, kids play all the time, you know? So what is it? What's the difference there between us and France or Sweden or whatever it may be? I mean, I don't even mind paddle and pickleball, those new sports. Fantastic. I think it's great. It's more inclusive. It kind of gets a foot in the door of that tennis racket environment, which is great. I'd love to play pickleball with my friends today, you know? Um, but I think that the most important thing probably for me was that you have idols and you have someone to aspire to and motivate you. And I think we lack that a little bit. And who else is there than locals that you want to support from your country and that you see, oh, they're like me, I can do it too. So that's a huge influence. We have a lot of that in rugby, we have a lot of that in cricket, we have a lot of that in netball, but unfortunately we don't have it in some of those more global sports. Um, so I think that kind of little bubble that also came from Croatia, which was huge tennis nation. In the club that I played was, Goran Ivanisevic, Monica Seles would sometimes play there. So there was, I was like, oh, so tennis was kind of in me a little bit, right? I probably went on a roundabout way to say that I enjoyed it, but I did.
I heard three things in there. The first thing that I heard was exposure. So, you grew up with it. It's around you. You came from a country that was a real tennis sport. You talked about your dad, taking you there and you hitting balls against the wall. So there's the first thing is, you have to be exposed to the sport to even know it might be a thing. The second thing is that it suited you. And
Sure.
so this thing of like how your brain works, how your body works, like what are the things that light you up? And of course, you described right at the beginning of this call that potentially doing so well in New Zealand might have been a little bit of a disadvantage because you were so used to doing well. So then when you go and you're like, oh, this is actually hard, like there's a bit of a, recalibration that needs to happen. But those early dopamine pathways of, ooh, I was able to solve that problem. I was able to work out how to get that backspin or whatever. I know nothing about. So forgive me, but so exposure is the first thing. And then the second thing is, it suited you. And you talked about not liking running or not liking endurance sports. And there are people who love running, people who love endurance sports. So everyone's going to have something that suits them better. And then the third thing I heard you talk about is aspiration. So you've got the exposure to the sport, you've got the does it suit me, and then you've got the what's possible for me. And it sounds like the aspiration bit is what's really missing in New Zealand. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I think it's because of the exposure part too, right?
Inspiration, aspiration.
Yes, correct. Yeah. The exposure part is really important because there needs to be a click in some of our juniors' heads where they go, "Oh, I can actually do it," or "Huh, I've just beaten someone who's beaten so and so or played at the Grand Slam," or even me playing juniors and then playing junior Grand Slams was a huge exposure because I got to, rub shoulders with the pros. I saw them train. I saw how they behaved and what they did, and that was very inspirational. So, yeah, and yeah, that's something that we can't just like move New Zealand up to, it is what it is. So we have to, as a we have to think differently, right? As we always do with, what is it, the number 8 wire, or we have to figure things out a bit differently and see how we can still do it. And we're good at that. So I have faith.
You talk about rubbing shoulders with the pros at the Grand Slams. I've heard you describe those environments where you don't really kind of hang out together. Everybody's so competitive and you're just, you're focused on your matches. And I've also heard you talk about being a shy kid and that it's a solo sport. You're out there on your own. Is it lonely? And specifically, is it lonely in the sense that, I've heard you talk about people going to Grand Slams or pro tournaments with their entourage, but is it lonely in the sense that you're not really close with other people who can relate to exactly what you're going through in that moment?
It's such an interesting question and such an interesting topic because the people that you're playing against or with all the time are the only ones who can relate to what you're going through, right? But maybe it's changed now. It's been a little bit since I was on the tour, but how do I describe it? It's think about it as you are in a corporate surrounding and you have colleagues and you're, 20 of you are vying for this amazing position and you're all trying to do something about it, whatever. But at the end of the day, you're all going to get paychecks from the organization. So even if you don't get that position, you're still going to be chummy with John and go for a beer or whatever it is, right? But in tennis, you're you're not going to get a paycheck. You're not going to get anywhere unless you beat Johnny or Sarah, right? Um, so it's really hard to be open and to communicate, hey, I'm stressed out and really nervous to a fellow player because they might take advantage. It's like showing a weakness, is how I would describe it. So yes, you can have close friends and you can have a laugh, but there's never a real, the whole Brené Brown thing. You don't want to show your vulnerability there because that can be used against you, right? So it is a very lonely sport. It gets easier as you kind of, your top 20, top 10, you can have an entourage, you have your mate, your mum and dad, your coach, your physio, your whole 6 to 7 crew, right? It forms a bubble for you. But if you are at the time when I was playing and I was on the player council, one of my agenda items was to really try and make the prize money distribution better for lower ranked players. It's still an ongoing issue today. And at the time, if you were ranked 75 and above, you were breaking even. So you were making no money. So at that point, you probably take one other person, which is a coach, and the lower your ranking, probably you wouldn't. Some players would just travel on their own, or maybe a parent would come or something like that. So yeah, it's a very, it can be very lonely. And that is one of the other kind of mental hurdles or part of it that you have to kind of overcome and get through.
This thing of if you're 75th, or if you're 75th, you're just in the world. I just want to make sure I've understood that. You're 75th in the world, you're just breaking even.
Yep.
I was a boxer, a competitive amateur boxer, and looked at going pro. And when I was assessing going pro, I was like, what are the pros? What are the cons? Pros, maybe I get a belt or whatever. Cons, I have to take my headgear off. I don't make any money. There's no fame in it. There's no glory in it. Like there was kind of not. So yes, it was what I did. And I love your description of tennis as like the problem solving, because that's what I loved about boxing. I always described it as trying to play chess while people are throwing lawn chairs at you. But eventually I was like, well, there's no upside to going pro because, why would I? Why would someone go for gold in tennis? Or is it just because you've done it so much and that's just the next thing you keep going for? Like, what's the upside?
It's kind of like I compare it to gambling. You are literally, it's you think you're gonna hit the jackpot. Because
Uh-huh.
at a top 100 level, anything's possible. Everyone can play really good tennis. It's very true. What separates kind of that really top 20, top 10 is the mental side. And you have faith that you're going to do it, that you're going to win a Grand Slam, that's your goal, that you're going to be top 10, whatever it is. And you have you can't doubt it, because if you doubt it, then you might give up. I remember thinking about it, watching all these players, and I'm like, we all know that half of these 120 something players are going to be gone in the first round. And then the next day, the other half's going to go, and just keep very likely in your whole career throughout the year, you're going to lose every week. Right. But there's a overarching kind of faith and belief in yourself. That's what got you there in the first place to where you are, and you continue carrying it on. And that's my opinion, right? But that's how I see it.
There's no way you get to top 200 and go, oh, well, the likelihood of me making top 10 is like, once you're on that
Totally.
path, you're going to keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a there's a huge dopamine endorphin, and you want it again and again. And for some it does happen, there's been so many success stories where you're maybe like, look at Emma Raducanu, came from qualifying, won the US Open. It's unreal, right? It does happen. So, and then you see that, or you see a player that you've beaten and they've just won a Grand Slam, and you're like, well, I got to keep going.
Nice. You talked a little bit earlier about having interests outside of tennis, and I understand you're an accomplished musician. Tell me a little bit about your music world.
Now I haven't played much at all, to be honest, in a very long time, but I started playing guitar when I was actually traveling when I was about 20, 22 or so. And I picked it up just to learn. And I loved it. And honestly, it was kind of a meditation of some kind, or thing that helped me get through the long journeys and the kind of ups and downs of tennis. So picked it up, had a little mini guitar that I traveled with and loved it. Started kind of dabbling around the computer with it, making some songs. Started to pick up the drums later on, kind of I was probably towards the end of my career. So Yeah, very, very musical. My mum was probably the musician side. She played violin throughout her teens and university and stuff. Um, but yeah, I don't I don't play so much. Unfortunately, because I just don't have the time. Um, but yeah, I in hindsight should have been in a rock band, really, Kyla.
Why is that?
I don't know, I just, it was a lot of fun. I always loved jamming with other people and I thought it would be really fun to be in a band. I think
I've
your
listened to your
average
music.
oh,
Yeah, no, I loved it. I loved it. I spent a bunch of time listening to the 2 albums you got on Bandcamp.
oh, thank you. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that was a very DIY in a hotel rooms across the world job, by the way.
So good.
So,
So good. You know,
apologies.
this theme that I'm hearing coming through is, just what a relentless learner you are, and how does that just relentless commitment to learning come through with the work you're doing now?
It's a big, big part for me, yeah. I I need to be doing something where I'm learning. It's, like when I don't know if people do this, but when they're thinking about what they want to do, like as a career or what kind of job, that's like my number one on my list is I need to be learning something. Um, yeah, I mean, how did I get to what I'm doing now? I work as a consultant at PwC in human-centered design or customer experience. What that actually means is we help organizations solve problems, anything to do with people, I guess you could say. Could be from an organizational lens on how they operate, or it could be towards how their customers behave or what they want or the products they design for them, etc. Um, I got into it because this journey's been quite funny, but well, not funny, but it's interesting. I knew I didn't wanna stay in tennis as a coach or kind of be in that environment after I retired. I kinda wanted to step away. I didn't wanna do the traveling so much anymore and so forth. And while I was playing, I chipped away at a business degree. I finished that when I retired, so I majored in economics, and I did that degree because it was the only degree that I could do extramurally or long distance that didn't have classes or labs or anything. So if I had it my way, I would have gone the sciences or something medical or something like that. But so I ended up with this degree and I thought, okay, um, can I use this in some creative way? Because I like design, I like drawing, I like playing music, whatever that may be. And so applied for a few things and ended up here. It's quite a creative team within a big corporate, so to speak. And I've still obviously, put my hand up for tennis things, and I was on the board of Tennis New Zealand, and I managed the Billie Jean King Cup team, and I still help some of our juniors when I can and things like that. But that's predominantly what I do now.
Sometimes it helps me to understand things by understanding the kind of counterfactual. Can you think of an example of a kind of design that should not be human-centered?
I 100% agree, and if you think about it, any organization is dealing with some kind of or any business is dealing with some kind of customer, right? So no, but not every business and not every organization does that. It can sometimes be very back end profit driven, unfortunately. So that's I think it's really developed over the last 20 to 30 years. Before that it was
Can you
not
give us
even a
like a
thing.
headline of like what are the principles that apply?
Um, sure. I mean, you're trying to put the human at the heart of the story, or you're trying talking about empathy and stepping into someone's shoes. It really is about that. So, uh, I'll give you an example. Let's say it's an airline, and let's say that you want to know. from the moment that person leaves their house or is even booking a trip to they take off and go to that trip. What are all the things that happen in between? And you do that through various ways. You can do research, you can do interviews, you can do surveys, you can look through the company's data, you map that journey out, and then you go, right, well, what are the kind of moments that matter or things that actually are really valuable to that person? And then what are the things that cause them pain or they really dislike? And so once you kind of have a view of that, you go, okay, well, us as an airline, what are our kind of strategic goals? What do we want to do? All right, well, we want to be the best at customer experience when they board the airplane. Okay, cool. So based on that, we'll look at that part of the journey and go, cool, you could do this, we could tweak this, we ideate, we think of solutions of how to improve that experience. And then we go, cool, let's go look at the back end. Well, what are our systems supporting that? What's the technology? What are the processes? Who are the staff that do that stuff? And you basically go, well, this could change. And you tweak this whole blueprint. And in a nutshell, that's kind of what we do.
So what I'm hearing is starting from the experience you want the customer to have or the user to have, the way you want the customer or the user to feel, and then working backwards to go, what are the systems and processes that we need to have in place in order to support that?
Totally. Yeah.
When I think of human-centered design, there's a piece of it for me that sometimes, but doesn't necessarily, sometimes might involve delight.
Mm.
And I will never forget my good friend Philip Fitzgerald. When he got his first iPhone, this would have been like 2006 or 7, whatever it was. And he was showing, it was like one of the first iPhones in New Zealand. And he was showing it to me and he was like, look at this. And he scrolled through his contacts list and he got to the end of the contacts list and it did a little bounce. And he's a designer. So he appreciates, he was so chuffed by this little bounce that it did. And I was like, this is something that makes no sense in terms of functionality. It doesn't make any difference at all. But in terms of my experience, I go, oh, I know I got to the end because it did a thing that in, the real world, when I hit the end, I might bounce off it a little. There was a piece there that I think Steve Jobs was really exceptional at. Steve Jobs, by all accounts, was not a nice man. But I believe he was extraordinarily empathetic in the sense of being able to go, he was famous for saying, people don't know what they want until I show them. Empathetic in that way that is not about niceness, but that is about understanding what the human experience is going to be like on the other end.
Totally. I had a similar Apple experience. This was a little while ago now, Steve Jobs was still around, I think. And I remember I had whatever it was, an iPod or whatever it was at the time, and something was wrong. And I went to that Apple store in the States and I thought, oh, it's going to take forever. I'm going to be in a line. They're probably going to have to take it and I won't get see it for a month. And it was unbelievable experience. It was I came in, it was no waiting time. I had an appointment and the person just knew exactly what had happened. And they literally just gave me a new iPhone or what, fixed it right in the moment. And I was just like, holy cow, this is unreal. And I didn't even think about, why couldn't every experience be like this, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And this thing of, a lot of companies are focused on profitability. Certainly I have a view that we can get to profitability by putting the customer at the heart of the experience, understanding what their experience is like and building around that rather than building around the systems we want to have and how do we force the customer into those systems. To me, that's absolutely a road to profitability.
Absolutely. And I think it's the CLV, right? The customer lifetime value. So with my Apple example, since then I bought 20 other Apple things and I'm a devoted Apple user and I have a Mac and I love everything that they do, probably a lot due to the experiences I've had with, when things go wrong, right? And how quick has that been fixed and addressed and communicated? So at the end of the day, you are there because you're serving some kind of purpose to help someone or something, right? So if you're not in times with what they're wanting, you're gonna be on a ship that's sailing completely in a different direction to where the port is.
Amazing. Marina, we are just about out of time. It's been such a delight to chat with you. I've taken so much away from this conversation. Thank you so much for taking your sacred, precious, non-renewable time and spending a little bit of it with me. I really appreciated it.
No, thank you. I really enjoyed it. I love listening to your podcast. So keep up the great work, and thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for listening. What an absolutely delightful human being. She's warm, she's friendly, she's honest. Like, she talked a lot about being shy and enjoying the solo nature of tennis, but then she's so gregarious. And I felt like there was such an honesty and a self-awareness in the way that she reflects on her career, not just the highlights, but the cost, the pressure, the internal work required to keep evolving as a human, the injuries that she suffered. I was especially struck by how clearly she understands herself, not just in terms of tennis, but in terms of her overall commitment to growth, the music that she writes and performs, her education, the work that she's doing now with human-centered design. What a person who is just fully experiencing what it is to be alive. Love it. A huge thanks to Celebrity Speakers NZ for supporting this episode. If you want to book Marina for a keynote and leave your audience beyond inspired, Celebrity Speakers are the ones to reach out to. Thanks again for listening. Please do let me know your feedback. You can reach me on hello@kailakolbin.com. And of course, like, subscribe, follow. I am always grateful for your offerings to the algorithm gods. Thanks again, and see you next week. Hunger and Heart is brought to you by the Crusaders Leadership Program. Whether you're coaching under fives or a professional team, we all want the same thing: to build a culture of trust, to get the best out of your people, and to grow players into leaders. The Crusaders Leadership Program lets you get up close and personal with some of the greatest rugby legends of all time. People like Sir Wayne Smith, the Professor, Sam Whitelock, Kieran Reid. You'll connect with a global group of ambitious, caring coaches from a range of codes and backgrounds. And most importantly, you'll gain skills and techniques to drive impact and outcomes for your team. The Crusaders Leadership Program is a 2-week high-intensity virtual experience. It is delivered exclusively online, accessible from anywhere. Hunger and Heart listeners get 10% off the full price of the program. Use the code HUNGER at checkout. You can find out more about the Crusaders Leadership Program at crusadersleadership.com. That's crusadersleadership.com. Hunger and Heart is created by BOMA and the entire BOMA team, including Tito Bernal, Rach Engel, Hannah Hudson, Johanna Coxon, and me, Kaila Kolbin. Thanks for listening.